People think the hardest thing about my post was standing still. It was not. Any man can hold his body in place if he decides to. The body is obedient in the end, and the cold and the heat and the ache in the small of the back are only whether you wait out. The hardest thing was the silence. Not the keeping of it, the cost of it. To stand at the sovereign's gate of Wexhall Palace and let the whole loud world come to you and break against you like surf against a sea wall, and to give it nothing. No flinch, no word, no proof that you had even heard. That is what they paid me to do, and I did it for 11 years, and I can tell you now, with a clear head and a good distance behind me, that the silence was the only part of the job that ever frightened me. I am telling you about one afternoon in particular. It was the kind of afternoon that comes once or twice in a guardsman's career, when the whole machinery of who you are is set against a single arrogant stranger, and you find out, in front of 1,000 cameras, whether the discipline you have built was a wall or only a curtain. My name is William Ashe. By the day I am speaking of I had risen to color sergeant in the Corving Crown Guard, and I had stood that gate so many mornings that I knew the angle of the sun on the cobbles in every month of the year, the way a farmer knows his own fields. I knew which paving stone in the forecourt had a hollow under it that drank the rain. I knew the names of the pigeons. I am not joking about the pigeons. Let me set it down plainly, because the plain version is the truest one, and because the men I served with would want it told straight. Wexhall sits above the river on the north edge of the capital, an old gray pile of stone with 140 windows on the river front, and a forecourt wide enough to drill a battalion. The Sovereign's Gate is the formal entrance, 2 tall iron leaves between stone piers crowned with the lions of the House of Corving, and on either side of it in their sentry boxes stand 2 men of the Crown Guard in full ceremonial dress. The long red wool tunic that is an oven in July and a refrigerator in January. The tall black bearskin that weighs on your neck like a sin you cannot put down. The white gloves, the polished metals, the chin strap that bites a groove into your jaw by the end of a watch. And the rifle, always the rifle held just so, the butt grounded, the barrel against the shoulder, the sling drawn tight. The crowds came for us the way they come for any spectacle. They lined the railing 6 deep on a good day, phones up, children on shoulders, and they tried everything to make us move. They told jokes. They sang. They mimicked our faces. A man once stood for 40 minutes telling me in great detail why I was wasting my life while his wife filmed me not caring. Some of them blew in my ear. Some of them counted my blinks. They believed, most of them, that they were the first ever to try, and there is a particular tenderness I came to feel for that belief, because it meant they did not understand what they were looking at. They thought the stillness was the absence of a man. They had it backward. The stillness was a man holding the line of himself the way you hold a door against a storm, with everything he has from the inside where it does not show. I had a reason to be good at it. That is the part of this story I kept folded away for years, and I will give it to you now because without it the rest does not make sense. Before the gate, before the red tunic, I was something else. I will not dress it up. I spent 9 years in the mountain reconnaissance companies, in the high passes along the Kessler line, in a war the country has mostly chosen to forget because it was small and far away, and we won it cheaply, which is to say we won it with other men's lives and not enough of the public's attention. I learned in those years exactly what a human being can be made to endure and exactly how little of it shows on a face that has decided not to show it. I came home with a decoration I do not like to name, the highest one the crown gives, the one they pin on you in a quiet room and then never speak of again. And I came home with the absolute, bone-deep knowledge that I never again wanted to raise a hand against another man as long as I lived. So when my time was up and a recruiting officer asked me, half as a joke, whether I fancied standing still in a fur hat for the rest of my career, I said yes before he had finished the sentence. He thought I was running away from soldiering. I was running toward the one form of it that asked me only to hold and never to strike. That is the man who was standing at the Sovereign's Gate on the afternoon, Victor, Solène decided to make a fool of him. I had heard the name that week the way you hear weather coming. Solène was a foreigner, a builder of ships and the things that go on ships, engines, guns, the long gray hulls that governments buy when they are afraid, and he had come to Corvin to sign the largest defense contract our crown had put its name to in a generation. The papers had been full of it. The fleet was old. The yards needed work. The politicians had argued about it for 2 years and finally settled on Solène's company because Solène's company was cheapest and largest and most ruthless, which in that business are the same 3 words said 3 ways. He was to be received at the palace with full honors. There was to be a signing in the long gallery, and a banquet and photographs that would run in every paper from here to the far coast. The whole thing rode on his goodwill, and the whole government knew it, and Victor Solène knew it best of all. I knew none of the politics that morning. A guardsman is told where to stand and when, and the why of it is somebody else's burden. I knew only that the forecourt had been swept twice, that the band was drawn up under the colonnade, that the railings were packed tighter than I had seen them in a year, and that a motorcade of black cars was being waved through the outer cordon and onto the gravel of the long drive. I stood my post. The sun was high and white. The wool drank it and held it against my chest like a flat iron. I fixed my eyes on a point 200 feet away, on the riverside parapet, where a gull was working at something, and I waited. The cars stopped. Doors opened. Men in pale suits came out first, the kind of men who walk a half step ahead of their employer so they can look back at him, and then Solène himself. I will describe him fairly, because a story like this is only worth telling if the villain is real, and a real man is never a cartoon. He was perhaps 60, broad and well-kept, with the deep even tan of a man who is never cold, and silver hair cut close, and a suit that fit him the way good suits fit men who own the tailor. He moved with the unhurried certainty of someone who has not waited in a line, or held a door, or wondered whether he was welcome in 40 years. His eyes went over the forecourt, the band, the colonnade, the swept gravel, the lions on the gate, and I watched them take inventory, not with wonder but with the flat assessment of a buyer walking through a property he has already decided to purchase. Everything he looked at, he priced. I have seen that look exactly twice in my life. The other time was on the face of an officer across a valley, through a glass, the morning before he tried to take a position I was holding. I did not like the company the memory kept. His handlers steered him toward the colonnade, toward the welcoming party of officials in their sashes. He should have gone that way. The whole afternoon was arranged so that he would go that way. But Solène stopped on the gravel, halfway across the forecourt, and turned his head and looked at me. I felt it the way you feel a cold draft find the back of your neck. He had found something more interesting than the officials. He had found the statue. He said something to the man beside him, and the man laughed too quickly, the way you laugh at a thing that is not funny when your salary depends on the funniness of it, and then Solène changed his course and came toward the gate, toward me. The officials hovered, uncertain, that small herd panic of people whose schedule has just been taken out of their hands by someone they cannot correct. The band played on. The crowd at the railings, sensing the way crowds do that the script had slipped, leaned in. He stopped 4 feet in front of me, close enough that I could smell his cologne over the gun oil and the wool. Close enough that, if I had been the man I used to be, in the place I used to be, the 4 feet would already have been a problem I had solved without thinking. "Look at this," he said to no one and to everyone. His accent was foreign, his command of our language total, his voice pitched to carry. "They told me about these. The toy soldiers, the little tin men." He walked a slow half-circle around me, the way you walk around a horse you are thinking of buying, and the cameras at the railing turned with him, 100 small black eyes. "Do you know," he said, coming back to my front, "I have been in this country 2 days, and you are the first thing I have seen worth photographing." I gave him nothing. The gull on the parapet had finished its business and flown. I found a new point, the keystone of the gate, the carved mane of the left-hand lion, and I held it. He doesn't move, Solène announced, delighted to his handlers. They train them not to move, it's a discipline. He said the word as though it were a small clever trick a dog might be taught. Sit, stay, roll over. Watch. He raised one hand and snapped his fingers in front of my eyes. I did not blink. I had not blinked at men with more in their hands than fingers. Extraordinary, he said, and there was, for one moment, something almost like real wonder in it. And if he had walked away then I would have forgotten him by supper, the way I forgot the man who lectured me for 40 minutes and the woman who counted my blinks. The forecourt was full of men I had forgotten. But he did not walk away, because Victor Solène was a man who, when he found a thing that would not yield, did not move on. He pressed. It was, I would understand later, the entire engine of him. The reason he had a fleet's worth of contracts and a private aircraft and men who laughed before he finished his jokes. He had spent his whole life finding the immovable thing and leaning on it until it moved. And it had always, always moved, because the world is mostly made of things that move when a rich man leans. And here, on a sunny forecourt in a small kingdom, he had found a thing that would not. And instead of wonder, he felt the old itch, the gambler's itch, and he decided to win. "Salute me," he said. The forecourt did not go quiet, the band still played, the crowd still murmured, but something in the air around the two of us went very still, the way the air goes still before weather. His handler's smiles fixed in place. One of the officials under the colonnade took a step forward and then thought better of it. "Salute me," Solène said again, louder, enjoying it now, playing to the railings. "Go on, I'm a guest of your king. I'll be signing him a great deal of money this afternoon, more than this whole pretty palace is worth, more than you'll see in 100 lifetimes, soldier. So salute me, show me the famous discipline." He spread his arms, inviting the cameras to witness. "Salute me, toy soldier. I will tell you exactly what I was thinking, because that is the only thing of value I have to give you, and because no camera ever caught it. I was thinking that I had been ordered in my life, by men with the legal and moral right to order me, to do far harder things than salute, and I had done them. I was thinking that this man had no such right, that a salute is not a courtesy you spend on whoever asks, but a coin of a particular realm, given to the colors and to those who carry the king's commission, and that to give it to Victor Solène because he was loud and rich would be to make it worthless, the way a currency is made worthless by printing too much of it. I was thinking, with a clarity that surprised me, that this was the cleanest test I had faced in years, cleaner than the gate usually offered, because the gate usually offered me only boredom and bad jokes, and here was a man asking me, in front of the whole world, to sell the one thing I had decided never to sell. And I was thinking, this is the part I am least proud of and most determined to tell you, that the old man in the high passes, the one I used to be, could have ended Victor Solène's afternoon in under 2 seconds, and that some small, ugly animal in me wanted very badly to let him. So I held. I held the way I had held a ridge for 11 hours once, with the cold coming up through my boots and a sound in the dark I could not afford to fire at. I held my eyes on the lion's mane and my hands at the regulation grip and my breath slow and even, in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, the rhythm they teach you for the long watches and the longer nights, and I gave Victor Solène exactly what I had given the gull and the keystone and 11 years of strangers. Nothing. His face changed. I was watching the lion, but you learn to see the whole field without moving your eyes, and I saw his face change. The performance fell off it for half a second, and underneath was something I recognized, something I had not expected to find in a man like him, and it was fear. Not of me, of the nothing, of the wall. He had leaned on the immovable thing, and it had not moved. And for 1/2 second Victor Solène was a small boy who has pushed against a door he was sure would open and found it locked, and did not know what was on the other side. And then, because men like him cannot stand that half second, cannot survive it, he did the thing that turned the afternoon from a story about a rude man into a story about the law. He hit me. It was not much of a blow as blows go. I have been hit by men who meant it, and Victor Solin did not mean it the way they meant it. He meant it the way a frustrated child swats a toy that will not work, an open-handed cuff across the metals on my chest, hard enough to wring them, hard enough to rock me back a half-inch onto my heels. The decorations jumped on their ribbons. One of them, and I knew which one without looking, knew it by the particular small chime of it, was the one from the quiet room, the one they never speak of, and his hand had struck it, and the crowd at the railing made a single sound, a low collective intake, the sound 1,000 people make when they have all just watched a line be crossed. His handlers froze. The officials froze. The band, God bless the bandmaster, whoever you were, kept playing, because that is the one thing the band is for, to keep the world looking like it is still the world. And the brass went on under the hot sky as if nothing had happened. I did not move. I want to be very precise about this because it is the whole of the matter. He had struck me, and I had the right under our law. A man of the Crown Guard struck at his post has rights. And I had the training, and I had, God forgive me, the desire to put Victor Solin on the gravel and hold him there until other men came to take him away. The old animal in me had already done it in the dark behind my eyes, 3 different ways, each of them fast and clean and final. And I did none of them, because the gait is not the high passes, because the red tunic is not the gray field jacket, because the entire meaning of the man I had chosen to become, the reason I had said yes before the recruiting officer finished his sentence, was that I would stand at the place where a striking hand could be answered with a still face, and I would answer it with the still face, and in doing so I would prove to myself mostly, because no one else was keeping score, that the strength I carried was a thing I owned and not a thing that owned me. So I held. The medals settled on their ribbons. The chime of the quiet room decoration faded. I kept my eyes on the lion, and I kept my breath at 4 and 4 and 4, and I let Victor Solin's blow hang in the air between us, unanswered, growing, the way an unanswered thing grows until it fills a whole forecourt. It was the not answering that did it. I understood that even then in the moment with the heat in my chest where his hand had landed. If I had struck him, it would have been a brawl, and a brawl is a thing the world knows how to forgive and forget. 2 men, tempers, a scuffle, regrettable, move along. But 1,000 people had just watched a rich foreign stranger strike a still man who did nothing, and there is no forgetting that, because it is not a brawl, it is a portrait, and the portrait was being painted in real time on 100 screens. He had not humiliated me. He had, in front of more witnesses than he would ever count, humiliated himself, and the only one on that forecourt who did not yet understand it was Victor Solin. He understood that he had not won. That much got through to him. The fear flicker came back across his face, and this time it stayed, and a man like that, when the fear stays, has only one move left, which is to make the loss bigger so that it cannot be a loss. He reached out and he took hold of my rifle. Now, here I must slow down, because here is where the years almost undid me, and where instead the years saved me. A rifle is not a prop. The men who watch us think it is a prop, a polished accessory to the costume, and most days they are not wrong to think so, because most days nothing happens and the rifle is only weight. But it is a real weapon. And it was, that day, loaded, because the sovereign's gate is a real post guarding a real palace, and a guardsman's first and oldest duty, before the standing still, before the discipline, before any of it, is that the weapon does not leave his control. Ever. They drill it into you until it is below thought, below choice, in the place where your hand knows things your mind has not yet been told. When a stranger's hand closed on my rifle, the old reflex came up out of that deep place like a fish striking, faster than decision, and that reflex did not care about cameras or contracts or the red tunic or the man I had chosen to be. That reflex was the high passes, and it wanted to break the hand that had touched the weapon. I felt it come up. I want to be honest that I felt it come up, the whole hot length of it, the trained violence I had spent 11 years standing on top of. and in the half-instant before it reached my hand, I made the only real decision of the entire afternoon, the decision that everything I am had been pointing toward without my knowing it. I did not let it through. I took the reflex and I turned it, the way you turn a horse that wants to bolt, not by fighting it, but by giving it somewhere to go. I rolled my shoulder, brought my own hand over Solen's, and I took the rifle back, not with a strike, not with a wrench that would break a wrist, but with a single slow, continuous pressure, a closing of the hand and a turn of the body, the kind of thing that looks on film, almost gentle. And that is in fact the most controlled thing a trained man can do, because it is far harder to take a weapon back softly than to take it back hard. I took my rifle out of Victor Solen's grip the way you take a knife out of a child's hand, and I grounded the butt, and I returned to the position, and I put my eyes back on the lion. It had taken perhaps a second and a half. He stumbled back a step, his hand empty, his face white now, properly white under the tan, the performance gone entirely, and what was left was just a frightened, furious old man who had been disarmed by a statue without the statue once looking at him. And it was then, with the whole forecourt holding its breath and the band somewhere far away still playing, and 1,000 cameras drinking it all down, that I broke my silence. Once. For the only time that day, and very nearly the only time in 11 years. I did not raise my voice. I did not turn my head far, only enough that he could see I was speaking to him and not to the air. I said one sentence. I had not planned it. I have wondered since where it came from, and the only answer I have is that it came from the high passes, from the man I used to be, who had finally, after all those years, found the right use for what he knew. "Sir," I said quietly, so quietly that the men at the railing nearest us went still trying to catch it, "I have stood in front of things that meant to kill me, and they had the decency to be afraid, which is more than I can say for you." That was all. I returned my eyes to the lion. I never looked at him again. I did not know, when I said it, that the king was watching. I want to be careful here, because this is the part where the story stops being mine and becomes the crown's, and I was, after that single sentence, only a man standing still again, a witness to my own afternoon like everyone else at the railing. So I will tell you what I learned afterward, from men who were inside the palace and saw it, and I will tell you the parts I saw, and I will keep them separate, because that is how an honest man tells a thing. What I saw was this. Solen stood frozen for a moment, and then his handlers came alive at last and folded around him and steered him, fast now, toward the colonnade, toward the welcoming party, away from the gate and the cameras and the still man who had just said an unforgivable true thing to him in front of the world. The officials received him with their sashes and their fixed smiles, and the great machinery of the visit clattered back into motion, and carried him up the steps and through the doors and out of my sight. And the band reached the end of its piece and began another, and the crowd at the railing slowly remembered to breathe. And an hour later my relief came, and I marched off the post and into the guardroom and sat down on a bench, and found that my hands were not quite steady, and I was glad no one was looking. What I learned afterward was this. The king of Corvin, I will not give you his name. He was an old man by then, and he is gone now, and he was good to me, and I will let him keep his privacy even in a story, had not gone down to the forecourt to receive Solen, because that is not what kings do. He was to receive him formally in the long gallery at the signing. But the king had a habit, well known to his household and unknown to his guests, of watching the forecourt from a particular window on the first floor before any large reception, a tall window behind a gauze curtain from which a man could see the whole sweep of the gate and the gravel and the colonnade without being seen himself. He liked, they told me, to watch the people arrive. He said you could learn more about a man from how he crossed a forecourt than from anything he said once he was indoors. He had watched Victor Solen cross the forecourt. He had watched him price the palace with his eyes. He had watched him turn aside from the welcoming party to torment a sentry for the cameras, and order him to salute and strike him, and lay hands on his weapon. and he had watched a color sergeant of his own crown guard, a man he happened to know, take the weapon back without violence and stand. And he had been close enough to that tall window, with it open a hand's width against the heat, to hear, carried up on the still hot air, one quiet sentence. He happened to know me. That is the thread I have not yet given you, and I give it now because the king would want it told, and because without it you might think what happened next was about a sentry, when it was really about a soldier. The decoration from the quiet room, the highest the crown gives, is pinned on you by the sovereign himself, in person always, no matter who you are. There are not many of us who hold it. We could fit in a small room, and most of the small room is dead. The king had pinned it on me himself, years before, after the Kessler line, in a quiet room exactly like the ones they always use, and he had shaken my hand and held it a moment longer than the protocol required, and said a thing to me that I have never repeated to anyone and will not repeat now. He knew exactly who was standing at his gate in a fur hat. He had known it every time he passed. It was, I think, one of his private pleasures that the highest decorated soldier in his kingdom had chosen to spend his peace standing still at a gate, asking the world for nothing, and that the world did not know. So when Victor Solesmes was brought up the great stair and into the long gallery, and the contract was laid out on the long table with its pens and its blotters and its ribbons, and the ministers gathered and the foreign delegation gathered, and the cameras were admitted for the historic photograph, the king came in. He came in, the men who were there told me, looking entirely ordinary, an old man in a plain dark suit, and he greeted the delegation with perfect courtesy, and he stood at the head of the table where the contract waited, and Victor Solesmes, recovered now, indoors now, back on the ground where he knew how to win, where everything had a price and he could pay it, gave the king the broad, confident smile of a man about to be richer, and turned to take up the pen. And the king said, "I find I am not going to sign this today. I am told the room did a thing rooms do only a few times in a century. It stopped, the ministers' faces, the delegation's faces, Solesmes' hand halfway to the pen. Your Majesty," one of our own ministers began, the one who had spent 2 years arguing for this deal, the one for whom this signing was the crown of a career. "The terms have been—" "The terms are excellent," the king said. "I have read them, my objection is not to the terms." He let that sit. Then he turned to Solesmes, and he was, they told me, perfectly calm, perfectly courteous, an old man making a small remark. "Mr. Solesmes, a short while ago in my forecourt you struck one of my soldiers. You ordered him to salute you, and when he would not, you struck him, and then you put your hands on his weapon. He did you no harm. He did not even look at you. He is, as it happens, the most decorated soldier in my kingdom, though you could not have known that, and it should not matter that you could not have known it, because a man who would strike a sentry for sport would strike anyone the cameras were not watching." He paused. "I am not going to put my fleet in the hands of a man whose first act in my house was to strike a man who had sworn to stand still while he did it. I think you will understand that I cannot. It would tell my soldiers something about me that I am not willing for them to believe." That was the sentence, his sentence, not mine. Mine was only the small one on the gravel that he overheard that did it. There were other words after, I am sure, the necessary words, the cold smoothing over that great occasions require when they collapse. But that was the one that ended Victor Solesmes, and it ended him the way the truly powerful are ended, which is not with a blow but with a closing door, quietly, courteously, completely. I have spent a long time in the years since thinking about what happened to him after, and the truth is less dramatic and more total than a story would like. He was not arrested. He had broken no law that anyone wished to pursue, and a king who refuses a contract does not also drag the man to court. He simply left. The cars came back around to the forecourt. I was off the post by then, but men of mine saw it, and the pale-suited handlers came out fast and stone-faced, and then Solesmes, and the cameras that had come to record his triumph recorded instead a furious old man getting into a car with nothing signed, and that footage went everywhere the other footage had gone, which was everywhere. The whole world had watched him strike the still man. The whole world then watched him leave with empty hands. You cannot survive both of those in the same afternoon, not in his business, which runs on the appearance of strength and the goodwill of governments who do not like to be associated with a man the cameras have made into a brute. By morning, and I mean this almost literally, I have checked it against the dates and the markets, and it is very nearly true, his empire had begun to come apart. The lost Corving contract was the smallest of it. The lost contract was only money. What killed him was that two other governments, who had been near to signing their own deals with him, and who had watched the same footage everyone else had watched, found reasons over the following days to delay, and then to reconsider, and then to choose someone else, because no minister anywhere wants the photograph of himself shaking hands with the man who hit the toy soldier. His company's worth fell and went on falling. His partners, who had tolerated his cruelty as long as it came wrapped in success, discovered scruples the moment the success faltered. Within a season, he had been moved aside from the thing that bore his name by men who had laughed before he finished his jokes. I do not know what became of him after that. I did not look. A man can drown in a foot of water if you hold him there, and the world held Victor Solin in a foot of water made entirely of his own afternoon. And I felt, when I let myself feel anything about it, neither triumph nor pity, but the flat-closed feeling of a thing having balance that was out of balance. I have left out the part I find hardest to tell, and I will tell it now, and then I will be done. A week after I was summoned. Not formally. There was no parade, no ceremony. The Crown had decided wisely that the whole affair was best allowed to sink rather than be stirred. But quietly, the way the important things in that house were always done, I was brought up the back stairs and into a small room, and the king was there, an old man in a plain suit, and we were alone except for an equerry who stood by the door and pretended to be furniture, which is a thing I understood and respected, having spent 11 years being furniture myself. He did not thank me. I want you to understand that because it is the finest thing about him and the thing I have tried hardest to live up to since. He did not thank me because to thank a man for doing his duty is to suggest he might have done otherwise, and the king would not insult me that way. Instead, he looked at me for a while, the way he had looked at me in the other quiet room years before, and then he said, "You could have put him down. On the gravel, I saw your shoulder. I have seen enough soldiers to know what that shoulder was deciding." "Yes, sir," I said, "I could have." "Why didn't you?" And I told him the truth, the same truth I have given you, that I had spent my whole life learning what my hands could do and had come to his gate precisely, so that I might spend the rest of it not doing it, and that a man who only refrains because no one is testing him has refrained from nothing, and that Victor Solin had given me, without meaning to, the one gift I had not known I still needed, a witness. A reason to find out, in front of the whole world, whether the thing I had built was a wall or a curtain. The king listened to all of it, and then he said the thing I will close on, because it is the only verdict that ever mattered to me, more than the markets and the lost contracts and the footage and the empire coming apart. He said, "The hardest discipline is the one no one orders you to keep. You kept it." And he held out his hand, and I shook it, and he held it a moment longer than the protocol required, exactly as he had years before, and then I went back down the back stairs and out into the forecourt and across the gravel, past the spot where it had happened to the guard room, and I drew my kit, and the next morning I stood my post. People still think the hardest thing about that post was standing still. They are still wrong, and I have stopped trying to correct them, because the truth is not the kind of thing you can hand to a man at a railing on a sunny afternoon. The hardest thing was the silence, the keeping of it, and the cost of it, and the only afternoon it ever truly paid me back was the afternoon a powerful man ordered me to break it, and I broke it only once for one sentence on my own terms, and then went still again, and let the stillness do the rest. I stood that gate 4 more years. No one ever struck me again. But on quiet mornings with the sun coming up over the river and the cobbles still cold and the first crowds not yet gathered at the railings, I would settle into the position, ground the rifle, fix my eyes on the lion's carved mane, and feel the old strength sitting in my hands like a sleeping thing, owned and at peace, asking nothing, and I would think, there it is. There is the discipline, not the standing still. The choosing, every single morning, with no one watching and no one ordering and no one to know, to keep standing still. That is the whole of it. That is what the uniform was always for.